getting on air, so just went right to it.
Just went right to it. My mouse. That's what's missing. The little black one up there. All right. Before we get going today, I wanted to share something here. One of the professors that was asked to look over the Dead Sea Scrolls when they first came out was a man called David Flusser. Was a professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He's pretty much of his time. He was pretty much the foremost authority and all that stuff on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he did a series of teachings on the Dead Sea Scrolls back in the late 60s, early 70s. Not sure of the timing on that. Those teachings were turned into little booklets back in. This one in particular is copywritten in '89, so it took a long time for it to be translated into English and made into a booklet. They may have made the Hebrew version a long time ago. I don't know about that. I've not seen it. I ordered it, but I never got it. But anyway, in the English version, which was translated by Carol Glucker, page 15, he says, the Talmudic literature states that there were 24 sects in Israel. I'm going to call them denominations because I have such a hard time saying that word and it sounding right. But anyway, let's call them denominations. So the Talmud is, what he's saying is the Talmud says there's 24 denominations of Judaism, of religious Judaism in the Second Temple period that can be identified, right? But in the readings of Josephus, he wrote that there were only three: the Perishim, the Zadokim, and what we now know as the Essenes. So Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes. Now, he was not highly thought of for many, many years, this Josephus. Is that the right guy? Yeah, that's the one. But after Israel won back Israel and moved back in and started doing digs, and particularly with the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, turns out this man was deadly accurate. I mean, just incredibly accurate. And so we find out, well, there was more to this man than we thought. But this was another one of those things that was argued. Now, he goes on to say, if we examine more closely the plentiful information, apocryphal literature in Josephus, in the scrolls, speaking of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in the vast literature of the Talmudic sages, we will see that the different small groups were related in some way or were offshoots of those three basic groupings in Judaism. So there again, what he's saying is there's only three. Josephus was right. But what you had were, under each of those three, splinter groups, if you will. You had the little denominations of other groups that, and we see this in Judaism today. Even if you go to someone that says they are a conservative organization, the one on one side of town may lean more toward orthodoxy, while the one on the other side of town may lean more toward what's that liberal group that the rabbi, his daughter was the Reformers. The Reform group, very liberal group, right? Very not very religious, very liberal in their thinking. So you could find a group that considered themselves conservative on one side of town that leaned, more toward hardcore lifestyle, Torah lifestyle, or in these days it's not. You don't find very many people that do a Torah lifestyle. They do a Talmud lifestyle, which they call Torah, but it's not the same thing. Very, very different from the Second Temple period. But you can find the varying groups. And then there's always the group that doesn't really fit in anywhere in particular, that's out there in the country somewhere in some little corner of a building somewhere. I mean, It's the same thing today as it was back then. They all belong to some basic group. Anyway, so moving on. He said, the great controversies in the world of the sages, such as the one between the school of Hillel and that of Shammai, are well known. But one cannot say that the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, or the Hasidim, it's very important that you hear what he just said, or the Hasidim among them. Hasidim, that's the Hasidic group, the Hasidim of today, nothing like Second Temple Hasidim, nothing. I mean, there is no connection there except the name. Their beliefs and their lifestyles are utterly different. But of the Hasidim of the time, that's you actually find mention of this group in the New Testament letters in the Christian Bible, but they call them saints. We would think of them as, Jews would say pious, the Christians call them saints, but it's the same group in the Second Temple. So the Hasidim among them were completely different groups. Let me back up. But one cannot say that the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai or the Hasidim among them were completely different groups. They all belonged to the group of Pharisee sages. All of them. Further, he mentions the New Testament for a reason. He says the outlook of John the Baptist can be examined in the light of the newly discovered scrolls to see how close he was to the Essenes. One can even conjecture that he had once been a member of their group. The reason why he says this is because upon finding the Dead Sea Scrolls, it confirms something that Josephus said that nobody was terribly sure of because there was conflicting information from that time period. But now that you have the Dead Sea Scrolls, it confirms the diet that they ate was the same as John the Baptist. The clothing they wore, same as John the Baptist. And the groups, the people that were part of this group at Qumran, we now know because of the writings left to us that if they ever left that group, they were never allowed to come back, which John the Baptist never did. So anyway, by the way, the other reason why John the Baptist went to the wilderness instead of the city is that he wouldn't have had papers. If he left that group, they would not have sent him out with papers. And so if you didn't have papers, you couldn't teach in the city. You had to teach outside the city. So he's saying that there's a connection there between the guy they know as John the Baptist. He was most obviously one of these Essenes. One should also mention the Zealots, the activist group, which arose in the world of the sages. The Zealots belong to the Pharisee group. I have, as most of you know, translated the New Testament. One of the early things that I pointed out in the translation was that the group that Yeshua himself was a Parashim, he was a Pharisee, and which meant that the people he trained, his Talmudim, his disciples, were Pharisee disciples. That upsets the Christians when I say that, but it also tends to upset some Jews, and I don't understand why, but it does. But here's the thing. We see that this man Yeshua that they called Jesus was a Pharisee because the man they called John the Baptist, when speaking to the Pharisees, said to them, "There is one among you." And he was clearly speaking of Yeshua. There's no doubt that's who he was talking about. And he said to the Pharisees, "There's one among you." So right there, John the Baptist called Yeshua a Pharisee. I also know that he's a Pharisee because Pharisees didn't go around, as a general rule of thumb, correcting other people's doctrines. They corrected each other's doctrine. When a Pharisee had fallen off and gone into something else, a Pharisee would say, "Hey, look, you're going down the wrong road here," right? It didn't mean there wasn't crossover. But generally, the crossover just split the groups. You didn't go around correcting some other denomination, if you will. You didn't go around correcting their stuff. The reason why this happened in those letters is because they came to him. He didn't go to them, they came to him. They asked him the questions, he corrected their doctrine. And really, he wasn't correcting their doctrine, if you think about it. They asked him a question, he answered it. Which his answer was correct, and their thinking was incorrect. We know all this as fact, particularly since we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. So then you realize something else that was said in there. One of the followers of Yeshua was called the Zealot, or the Kani, the Zealot. That was a Pharisaic group. There's all kinds of things in there to show you this. And given what this Flusser discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and realizing that there were only 3 sects, we know that the New Testament sect was a Pharisaic sect. We know that they followed much more closely to the Essene doctrine than they did the Pharisaic doctrine. But Pharisaic doctrine started off in that same vein as the Essenes. There are some that teach that the Essenes were actually the Hasidic movement of the time. Good reason to believe that, but then there's good reason not to believe that. That's arguable. But what if it is the Hasidim movement, where you have a split from 2 sets of Hasidic movements? Because, by the way, there were Essene movements in Jerusalem, not just out at Qumran. Qumran's where they wound up, not where they started. But during the time that they were in Qumran, you still had Essene groups all over Jerusalem. All you have to do is read the Dead Sea Scrolls. They talk about it. It's not, I'm not making that up. So you had these groups that are considered Essene, that lived in the city, that had all things common, and went door to door, went house to house, is how it's put in the scrolls, for prayer and worship. They didn't go there for Bible study like Christians think of today when they read in the New Testament talking about going house to house. They went there for prayer, not for Bible study. But anyway, I think it's very probable that this group that people think of as the Christians from the 1st century, which that didn't happen. There were no Christians until Constantine. And even then, you don't have Christians, you have Catholics. And the Catholics, that name they didn't even have a name for this religion while Constantine was alive. It's in the 400s that they finally gave it a name. Eusebius tried to lay it out and build this thing, but it was eventually called Catholicism. Christianity didn't arrive until the 1500s CE, so the Christians were not there. You can't even put the Catholics there because they don't start until the 300s and don't even have a name until the 400s, so they were not there. But because the Catholic diocese used the work of Eusebius to develop this, to try to force their group back into the 1st century. They had to do this because they're asking people to give their tithe to them. And you have to establish yourself as the oracles of God and the priests of God if you're going to get the people to give their money to you. So that's what they had to do, was build this false reality, which they did. And so because of that, even among the Jews, even Flusser talks about the 1st century Christians. There were no Christians in the 1st century, none whatsoever. There were only the Jews in Jerusalem. There were 3 groups. There were a lot of splinter subcategories in those groups, and these people in the New Testament were Jews from those groups. They were not non-Jews. The Jews called each other Gentiles. They didn't interact very much with the non-Jewish peoples. They interacted with the Jews. They bought from the Jews. They sold to the Jews. They lived with the Jews. They worshiped with the Jews. They fought amongst themselves like all families do, to that degree, I'll say. Everything about those letters is Jewish. And I think that these groups they call themselves the Hasidim. All throughout those letters, they called themselves the Hasidim. But once you translate that into English, they become the saints. And the whole Hasidim thing gets lost. But they call themselves the Hasidim. And no one could ever nail down who the Hasidic movement of that time period was. We know that before the Hasmonean period, there was a group called the Hasidim. And we know that that name just all but disappeared by the time you get to the 1st century and were basically replaced with the Parashim, or the Pharisees. But there's talk in several of the Dead Sea Scrolls about the Hasids. And the only other place you find any talk of the Hasids is in the New Testament letters. That's what they called themselves, the Hasids. So this was a Jewish group, not a Christian group. Anywho, let's move on to our lesson today, which we begin in Shemot. Oh, I guess I should have done that a long time ago. All right, there we go. We begin with Shemot, or Exodus 24:13. Literally, in English, it says, "And he arose," Moshe, so Moses arose, "and Yehoshua," and Joshua, "from minister he," so Joshua was ministering to him at the time, "and he ascended," Moshe, so Moshe went up to mountain the gods, to God on the mountain, or to the mountain of the gods. It's one of the two. We'll find out. So it started off with Vayakam, which is, and he arose, is to arise. So he was either sitting in a chair, which they probably didn't have back then, or he was reclining on, a bed, what we would have to call a bed. It's going to be a pile of skins and stuff like that. But so he's in a reclining position of some sort, and he arises to his feet. Moshe, that's the guy they call Moses. Should be Yehoshua. I transliterated that wrong. So it's and Joshua. Then it says Mesharto, so it's literally from minister he, from his ministering. It's to wait on, to serve, to minister to. It's even said of worshipers, of the priests who serve in the temple, and literally that's what he was. Eventually they're going to build a tabernacle, and he's going to stay in that tabernacle, and he's going to minister. This was the guy that followed Moshe around and took care of him in any way he could. He was the Talmudim of Moshe, because that's what Talmudim did in the world of the Bible. They waited on their rabbi hand and foot. That was not something new. Could someone turn that monitor off, please? I don't seem to have a controller for it.
On the left side as you're facing it.
Move upward. No. Middle. Yeah, right there. Top button. There we go. Thank you. I do apologize for looking off to the right the whole time I've been talking. But that's what that does to me. All right, so we talked about him being the minister. Then it says, Vaya'al, and he ascended. He went up. So he stood up, and then he went up from there. Moshe, it says, did that. El, that's the word to. So he's going to Har, which can be mountain. It's usually used of a mountain, like Har Megiddo. Christians are like, don't you mean Armageddon? That's the word, right? If they were to recognize that word at all. But Har Megiddo is the mountain of Megiddo, right? What else do we have that starts with Har? I can't think of another one. But anyway, the mountain. What?
Hargrove.
Hargrove. Mountain of Grove. Mountain of grove trees and stuff. So then it says Ha Elohim. So it's the gods. It's God in plural. It's the plural of majesty. But it's the generic word. It's used of the real God and, of course, fake gods. Whatnot, what have you. Not a lot of exciting stuff here. But here's your translation. And Moshe arose. I put in the word away. And Moshe arose away from Yehoshua, his minister, and ascended to the mountain to God. Ascended the mountain to God. I put a word in there that shouldn't have been there. And ascended the mountain to God. So he went not on the mountain of God, but went on the mountain to God. And it will eventually be called the mountain of God, but not here. Casuto pointed out that the writing style utilized here is first given a general overview. That's the first thing you do. Second, you give the details. First, Moshe is to go up the mountain. Second, we'll see the details of his journey. This is the writing style of the time period. It very much fits that writing style. So verse 14. Literally in English it says, and to the elders said, dwell they to us in this, to that we will return to you all, and behold, Aharon and Hur, who with you, Lord, words he approached to them. Making sense to anybody? This is Ve'el. So, and turned, it's the here, there, and to, it's not to turn, but it's the word to. You turn from here to there, right? But there is a motion, a movement. So he's turned to Hazeh Kenim. He turned to the elders. So he's turned to face them. It's so that you will imagine in your mind someone turning to face a particular group of people, in this case, the elders. It's of an old man, of the elders of Israel, of the chief men, the rulers, the magistrates, hence the captains of the tribes. This word is from the root that means saggy skin. Just saying. Then it says, Amar. So he turned to them and said, it's to shed light on this subject, Shavu, dwell they. I have dwelt they, but it's dwell they. It's to sit down. Stay here. Don't get up. Don't go any further. Stay right here. Dwell here. Lanu. I need to put the next one here. That's weird. I have no idea why that says that. So he's saying to the elders, Lanu, to them, Vazeh, stay right here. This, odd, that's, and dwell, for a time, this is of a period of time passing over. It's a duration. Asher Nashu, that will return, to turn about, to return, metaphorically to be converted, of non-Torah observant persons, of a sinner, because they need to convert from their sin to Torah observance. But anyway, it's also for the word. So what he's doing is stay here until such time as I return Alechem, to you all. It's Alechem is Hebrew for to you all. Y'all. This is the Texas part of Hebrew. It's a noun indicative of motion. Remember that? We talk about nouns having action in Hebrew because they're not true nouns. So I'm going to return to you. Vehine, and behold, Aharon, Vehur, so Aharon and Hur, me, which means who or what, Imachem, who are with you, Va'al, which is, that's Baal. You know, you think of that as the bad god, you know, fake god guy and all that stuff. It's another generic word for Lord, a possessor, an owner, a used of a master. So here they're not using it in the negative. It's not about the person called Baal. It's the Hebrew word Baal that means Lord. Devarim. Now these are words, speeches, discourses, especially precepts, promises, royal mandates, those kind of things. Yigosh, that's to draw near. He will draw near. Aleihim is to them, to you all. So here's your translation. And to the elders, he said, dwell in this place till we return to you. And behold, Aharon and Hur, who are with you, the lords who have matters will approach them. So the people who have questions and issues, matters of, well, we've got to settle this between these two disputants and stuff like that, they're going to take those to Aharon and Hur instead of Moshe in his absence. So the lords, the masters, will bring it to them, not just the people in general. There are people who are set above the people. There is a hierarchy. In verse 15, ascended Moshe to the mountain, and he covered the cloud, the mountain. And it covered the cloud, the mountain. So the cloud covered the mountain. Vaya'al, and he ascended, so he went up, Moshe. So Moshe went up, to Hahar, Vayahash, to cover over, to hide or conceal something. So the top of the mountain is hidden, Ha'anan, by the cloud. Then it says at, which is just a pointer, ha. So the mountain. So the mountain was covered by the cloud. Here's your translation. And Moshe ascended the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain. Verse 16. And he dwelt glory Yahweh upon mountain Sinai, and he covered it, the cloud, 6 days, and he called to Moshe in day the 7th from midst the cloud, from the middle of the cloud. So it says, Vayishkon, and he dwelt. To let oneself down, to settle down, to lie down, especially to take rest. It's what you think of, to abide. So he stayed there. He dwelt in that, up on top of that mountain, right? Kavod. So what was it that dwelt on that mountain? Kavod, the glory. It's the heaviness, figuratively, the honor, the glory of men, the majesty, the glory, the splendor of something. Was it the splendor of Moses that dwelt up there? Was it the splendor of the cloud that dwelt there? Well, no, we know what it was because it says Yahweh. It gives the proper name of God. So it was the glory of God that's on top of that mountain. And it says all, which means on top of, up on. Har Sinai. So the glory of God was dwelling on the top of that mountain. Vayahasehu, and he covered it. It was covered over. It was hidden. He'anan, the cloud. It sounds like just like the last one, doesn't it? It's a covering, a veiling over. And they use the word. This very same word is used for a large army and a group of people that's too large to number. Because you got this large group of people, and you look out over the valley, it's completely covered with people, and you call it the clouds. The land was covered with the clouds of people. You should keep that in mind, because that comes up from time to time. Shishet is 6, Yamim, so 6 days. Va Yikra, and he cried out, he called out to. This is not just somebody saying something. This is somebody saying something very loud. And he cried out, and it's of the cry of humans, it's of the cry of animals. It's it's of cries that are articulate and cries that make no sense at all. It's just to cry out. But it's with a loud, passionate voice. So it cried out, El, to Moshe. God cried out to Moshe. What does that mean? That means everybody at the bottom of the hill, of the mountain, heard it. Because if God's crying out, you're going to hear it, people. She cried out to Moshe. Bayom, so in the day, Hashivi'i, in the seventh day. So it was quiet for the first 6 days. Moshe's up there hanging out. Nobody knows if God's talking to him. You can assume that he's not because it doesn't say so, or you can just assume that he did, and we just don't know what was said. But what we do know is in the seventh day, Yahweh called out to Moshe in a loud, passionate voice that everyone would have heard. And it says, mitoch, that's from the middle of something. Ha'anan, from the middle of the cloud. So here's your translation of 16. The glory of Yahweh dwelt on Mount Sinai, and a cloud covered it 6 days. And he called to Moshe on the seventh day from the midst of the cloud. Well, I thought I was going to have a bunch of stuff in there about what the guys said. I'm surprised. All right, we'll move on to 17. Going a little too fast today. Literally, it says, and sight glory Yahweh as fire devouring in head the mountain, or at top of the mountain, to eyes children Yisrael. So it says umare, in the sight, the appearance, the vision of it. You're looking at it, and it's the sight. You know, this thing you're looking at. Kavod. It was heavy. It was glorious. It was majestic, full of splendor of Yahweh. So the sight of Yahweh, now mind you, you can't see Yahweh. You're seeing the glory of Yahweh, but all you're really literally seeing is a cloud hiding the mountain, right? So they're not telling you that these people saw Yahweh, though some will take it that way. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that that sight, that glory, Ke'esh, was as fire. It was like a fever. It was like lightning. It was all-consuming. I don't know what else to say there. Splendor, full of brightness. Then it says, Ochelet, devouring. It was like a fire, like a devouring fire. Think about what fire does. It devours everything. If you have a stick in a fire, it will devour the stick, right? So it's like a devouring fire, this sight. It was as if the cloud was devouring the mountain. Berosh, Rosh being the head, or the leader, or the edge, or the top, the highest, most supreme part, most extended part. They use that of the person who's the head of something because he's the top, and it comes down, right? The buck stops here, if you will. That's at the use it of the top of a mountain is called that's why your head is called Rosh, because it's the top. It's the beginning. And so at the where the water hits the land will be called the top. I mean, the Rosh. I don't know what else to tell you that would help you understand it, but this is the top of Ha, the mountain. Le'ene, to the eyes. And they call them eyes because water flows from them. It's from the idea of a fountain. But that your eyes are a fountain. Then it says, so in the eyes, B'nai, that's the children. Now, it's used of sons, but it's also used of both sexes in that they use it for the word children. The reason why it gets used for sons is because translators at times noticed that it was only speaking of a man's boys, his sons, and so B'nai gets translated as sons. It's really incorrect because B'nai is children, and it covers both sides, but it is often translated as sons. So the children of Yisrael. Your translation then is, and the sight of Yahweh's glory was as a devouring fire at the top of the mountain to the eye of Yisrael. Now they're trying to describe something that's indescribable, right? There's this mountain, there's this cloud at the top of the mountain. When God just spoke normally, it shook all the ground around him. So if he cried out to Moshe, which meant it was loud enough for everybody to hear, what do you think happened? I mean, we should be able to surmise that the ground shook much harder. And so this is a sight that is, you can't describe to anybody. And the best anyone could come up with, it's a devouring fire at the top of the mountain. And then our final verse for this chapter. Literally, verse 18 says, and he went, Moshe, in midst the cloud, and he ascended to the hill, and it was Moshe in mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So it's Vayavo, and he went. It's to come in, to enter the place which anyone enters, as in entering a house or a city or a ship, to come in, to be brought in, to put something in a barn, used of annual produce because it's brought in. But it's also to, if you come to a place, you went to that place. If you come to a place, you arrive at that place. Those all mean the same thing. The words used both ways. So anyway, we're saying, and he went, Moshe. So Moshe went betoch. He went in the midst. He went in the middle. Now think about this. The people are describing this as a devouring fire, and Moshe walked right into the middle of it. And stayed there. Aman, the cloud, he's up there in that cloud. Vaya'al, and he ascended to go up. He's moving up as high as I guess he can go. El, it says to, Hahar, to the mountain. Vayahi, and it existed, it came to pass, any of those things will do. Moshe, Bahar, in the mountain, he was in that mountain, Arbaim, 40 yom, 40 days. He was on top of that mountain, inside that cloud for 40 days. Ba Arbaim, and 40 Lila, and 40 nights. So here's your translation. And Moshe went into the midst of the cloud, and he ascended the mountain. And Moshe was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Even Ezra said that 40 days and 40 nights was idiomatic for continuously. I think he may have caught that one. I believe he's right. Though we could say it was literal, all it's really telling us is that he didn't go up and come down, go up and come down, and go up and come down, and go up and come down. He remained there. So it could have been 10 days. It's just that he went up there, and when he came down, they were done. And I do believe this is correct. I do believe this is what the idiom means. You could take it literally and say it was 40 days and nights if you want to, but it probably doesn't mean that. And here's where we are. Short but sweet. This concludes our journey through chapter 24. Shalom, shalom, y'all.